The old man's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't pick up the coins. 6 men stood over him, laughing. Every person in that diner stared down at their plates. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A room full of adults pretending they couldn't see what was happening 3 feet away from them. Except one, a quiet man in a faded jacket, sitting alone with his 10-year-old daughter. Nobody in that room knew his name. Nobody knew what he'd done before he became just another tired dad stopping for coffee on a rainy Thursday night. They were about to find out. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And stay with me until the end, because what happens next changes everything. The rain came in sideways off the Pacific that night. It had been doing that since late afternoon. That particular kind of Oregon coastal rain that doesn't fall so much as materialize, the kind that soaks through a jacket before you realize it's raining at all. Redwood Bay sat low between the headlands and the tree line, and on nights like this, the whole town smelled like salt water and pine bark and wet asphalt, and the fishing boats out in the harbor disappeared into the mist like they'd never existed. Cole Barrett drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the center line. The truck's defroster was losing the argument with the windshield. He kept wiping it with the heel of his hand on the left side, a gesture so automatic he'd stopped noticing he did it. Dad? Yep. I'm hungry. I know. Like actually hungry. Not in an hour hungry. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:47 p.m. He'd miscalculated the drive from his sister's place in Coos Bay. Happens. I see a diner up ahead. Is it open? Lights on. Sophie pressed her nose against the passenger window the way she'd done since she was 4 years old, fogging the glass, leaving a small ghost circle that would still be there in the morning. She was 10 now, still did it. Cole had stopped mentioning it. The Harbor Lantern Diner sat at the edge of Route 9, wedged between a bait-and-tackle shop and a vacant lot where something had once stood before the county condemned it. The sign was an illuminated lantern. Half the letters in the word diner were dark, leaving it reading more like a puzzle than an advertisement. But the parking lot had a few cars in it, and the window light was warm, and Cole pulled in and cut the engine. "Stay close to me inside," he said. Sophie looked at him. "Dad, it's a diner." "I know what it is." She didn't argue. Something in his tone, some frequency she'd learned to read without being able to name it, told her this wasn't worth pushing on. She climbed out and tucked herself under his arm without being asked. The rain hit them for the 15 feet between the truck and the door. By the time Cole pulled it open, his collar was soaked. The Harbor Lantern was the kind of diner that had been exactly the same for 30 years and wore that fact without apology. Vinyl seats with tape over the cracks. A laminate counter with spinning stools, 3 of which had given up spinning. A chalkboard menu above the pass-through window where someone had written the word special without specifying what it was. There was a small TV mounted in the corner showing weather radar. The weather radar was just showing rain. A waitress in her 50s looked up from the counter when they came in. Her name tag said DEE. She had the build of someone who'd been on her feet since 1987 and had made peace with it. "Sit anywhere, hun," she said, already moving. Cole chose a corner booth. Always did. Had done it so long he no longer asked himself why. It was just where he sat, back to the wall, sight lines to both doors, slight angle on the kitchen window. He let Sophie slide in first so she'd be the one against the wall, and he took the outside edge facing the room. "You're doing the thing again," Sophie said. "What thing?" "The sitting with your back to nothing thing. Walls don't move, easier to watch the room. Normal people don't think about watching rooms." "Normal people," Cole said, "also lock their keys in their cars." Sophie picked up the menu. Cole didn't. He already knew what he wanted, coffee, black, and whatever came with eggs. But he spent a few seconds scanning the room before the menu went up. 11 people visible. D behind the counter. A cook he could see through the pass-through. 3 truckers in a booth near the door finishing pie. A young couple sharing headphones looking at a phone between them. An older gentleman near the counter, alone, small cup of coffee in front of him, white work shirt with a breast pocket. The kind of shirt you see on men who spent their whole lives in garages and machine shops and never fully left those places behind, even after they retired. The old man was studying his cup the way people do when they're not really looking at anything, just sitting with the night. Cole watched him for a moment. Something in the posture, Not sad, exactly, but settled. The posture of a man who comes to the same seat on the same night because the alternative is a quiet house. He looked away. The pancakes, Sophie said, and orange juice. At midnight. You said I could get whatever. Fair enough. Dee arrived, they ordered. She refilled the old man's coffee on her way back without asking, just tilted the pot with a familiarity that said she'd done it 100 Thursdays in a row. The old man nodded once, didn't look up. She moved back behind the counter. The rain hit the windows. Cole wrapped his hands around his coffee when it came and let the warmth do what it was supposed to do. He was starting to unwind, something that didn't happen fast, didn't happen easy, but was beginning, the way a knot begins to work loose, when the door hit the wall. Not opened. Hit. They came in like a tide. 6 of them. Late 20s, maybe early 30s for the one in front. Big men, the kind of big that's specific. Not gym-built, just naturally wide and accustomed to taking up space and having that go unquestioned. They were loud before they were through the door. Not the unconscious loud of people excited about something. The deliberate loud of people who want the room to know they've arrived. Cole's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes moved across them before he made a single other motion. 6. Door. Positions. The lead one, leather jacket, jaw like an anvil, the particular walk of a man who'd never been told no by anyone he respected, was scanning the room. Not looking for a seat. Performing. Making sure everyone had seen him come in. Cole had known men like this, seen them in training. Some of them washed out. Some of them didn't. The ones who didn't were the ones who'd learned to aim all that appetite at a mission. The ones who washed out found other ways to feed it. He set his coffee down. The leader's eyes swept the room and landed on the old man at the counter. Something in his face shifted. A recognition. Not pleasant. Well, look at that, the leader said. Cole heard it from across the room, clear and unhurried, the voice of a man who didn't need to shout because he already had everyone's attention. The old man looked up. His name, Cole would learn later, was Walter Briggs. 72 years old, retired mechanic. He'd been coming to the Harbor Lantern every Thursday night for 11 years. He had no reason to know what the look on that young man's face meant, no reason to have a defense ready. He was just an old man who'd come in for a cup of coffee. You're in our spot, the leader said. Walter looked around slowly. Every stool at the counter was empty except his. He looked back. All right, he said. I'll move. He started to slide off the stool, and the man crossed the room in 4 steps and put a hand on his shoulder and pressed him back down. I didn't say you could move yet. Cole watched Dee freeze behind the counter. The 3 truckers near the door developed a sudden interest in the table. The young couple with the headphones went very still. Nobody moved. Hey, Dee, right? The leader turned, gave the waitress a wide smile. You got any idea who this old man is? Dee opened her mouth, closed it. Name's Briggs, the leader said, still smiling. Old Walter Briggs. You know what Walter does, Dee? He collects things. Old tools, old junk, old grudges. He turned back to Walter. That right, old man? I don't want any trouble, Walter said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. The coffee cup in front of him trembled slightly. Trouble. The leader tasted the word. Mason Rourke doesn't make trouble, Walter. Mason Rourke solves problems. He leaned on the counter, bringing his face close to the old man's. And you have become a problem. Cole placed his right hand flat on the table. Sophie glanced at it, then at him. She'd learned to read that hand. It meant something was happening that required her father to be very still. Dad, she whispered. Keep eating, he said, quietly. She didn't. What happened next took about 90 seconds, and Cole cataloged every piece of it. Mason Rourke reached past Walter and knocked his coffee cup off the counter. It didn't fall. It launched. Hot coffee across the front of Walter's shirt, the cup skittering and breaking on the tile floor. Dee flinched. 2 of Mason's men laughed, not because it was funny, because they were supposed to. Then Mason reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded bill, and dropped it on the floor near Walter's feet. Pick it up, he said. Walter looked at the money, then at Mason. I'm not going to do that. Sure you are. Mason's voice had gone flat. The performance had narrowed into something else. Pick it up, old man, while you still can do it on your own. Cole's jaw worked once. He set down his cup. Dad, Sophie. One word. She stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were big. He recognized the look. It was the same look she'd had during a power outage 3 years ago, when she'd been convinced something was outside the house. He'd sat with her until 2 in the morning, leaving a lamp plugged in near the hallway so it'd come on when the power did. He'd never once told her there was nothing outside. He'd checked, cleared every room, every window, every shadow in the yard, then come back and said, "All good." Nothing got past the perimeter. She'd slept. She trusted him because he never lied to her about danger. He'd only ever managed it. "Go with D," he said, "behind the counter. Don't come out until I come get you." Sophie stared at him. Sophie. She slid out of the booth. D appeared, but reading something in Cole's face that she couldn't have named, and guided the girl behind the counter without a word. Cole stood up. He crossed the room slowly, not rushing, not announcing himself with noise or posture. He just moved, unhurried, the way water moves when it finds a course, because it's found the only way through, and there's no reason to be loud about it. He stopped a few feet from the group. Mason turned. His eyes traveled up and down Cole's frame and found nothing interesting. Mid-30s, 5'11". The build of someone who worked with his hands, a little. The faded jacket of someone who didn't make a lot of money. Hair that hadn't been cut recently. Eyes that were... Mason paused on the eyes for half a second. Just half. Then his face settled back into the smile. "Help you?" he said. "I think you're done here," Cole said. His voice was even. Not hard. Not loud. Just clear and without decoration. Mason tilted his head. "You think?" "I do." "That's real sweet." Mason looked at his men. A couple of them were grinning. "You hear this guy?" Cole looked at Walter. The old man had both hands on the counter, a coffee stain darkening the front of his shirt. 7 decades of a life standing behind his eyes, and in them right now, embarrassment. Not fear. Embarrassment. The kind that lands harder than fear because it has nowhere to go. Cole crouched down and picked up the bill Mason had thrown on the floor. He set it on the counter in front of Mason. "Your money," he said. Then he offered Walter his hand. The old man looked at it, took it. Cole helped him to his feet. "I'm Cole," he said. "Walter," the old man said. "Walter." Cole nodded. Then he turned back to Mason. "Everybody's had their fun. Now let's all go home." There was a beat of complete silence in the diner. Even the rain seemed to pause. Then Mason laughed. Not a real laugh. A sharp, disbelieving sound. The noise of a man who hadn't been defied in long enough that he'd forgotten it was something that could happen. "You lost your mind?" he said. "No," Cole said. "Walk away," Mason said, still smiling, still giving him the out. "Right now. Walk away, sit back down, pay your check, and we'll forget you ever did this." Cole looked at him steadily. He said nothing. "Okay." Mason dropped the smile. He stepped forward and shoved Cole in the chest. Hard. Cole's feet didn't move. He stood exactly where he'd been standing, with exactly the same expression on his face, and simply absorbed the shove the way a wall absorbs a shove. Mason's men went quiet. Cole looked at Mason. That was one. One what? One? Mason's face went strange. Not scared. Not yet, and maybe he wouldn't get there before this ended, but something in the sequence had broken from the script, and the script was what he'd been relying on. Nobody stood still when Mason Rourke shoved them. That wasn't how it went. One of his men, a thick, silent type who'd been standing near the far booth, walked over and grabbed the edge of Walter's table and tipped it. Everything on it, the napkin holder, the salt and pepper, a water glass, hit the floor in a cascade of noise. Walter jumped. Dee cursed from behind the counter. Cole turned his head and looked at the table on the floor, then back at Mason. "2," he said. "You counting something?" Mason said. "Warnings," Cole said. "For your benefit." "My benefit." Mason turned to look at his men again, spreading his arms. "This guy is warning me." He turned back. "What happens at 3? "You really don't want to find out." For a moment, just a moment, Mason hesitated. Not because he was afraid, because something in the air around Cole Barrett had shifted. Nothing visible. Nothing Cole had done with his body or his voice. But something in the atmosphere, some frequency men who run on intimidation are actually very good at reading, even if they don't know they're reading it. Then one of Mason's men said something from across the room. Low, Cole didn't catch it. And Mason's face hardened. He stepped toward Walter and grabbed him by the front of his stained shirt. Here's what's going to happen, Mason said, pulling the old man close. You're going to come outside with me, just for a little conversation. And your new friend, he glanced at Cole, is going to sit back down and mind his own business. At the same moment, in Cole's peripheral vision, another of Mason's men was taking 2 slow steps toward the counter, toward Sophie. Everything in the room sharpened. Cole had a combat instructor once, an older SEAL Master Chief named Decker, 15 years in the teams and about 93% scar tissue, who told him something early on that had never left. The training doesn't make you fast, it makes your decisions faster. The body will always do what the body does. What changes is that you stop wasting time deciding. Cole stopped wasting time. He moved Sophie farther behind the counter with one quick word to Dee, keep her there. And Dee put her arm around the girl without needing to be asked twice. Then Cole turned back to the room, and he looked at Mason, and he looked at the man moving toward the counter, and he looked at the 4 others spread across the diner, and he took a slow breath. Last chance, he said. Walk out, all of you, right now. Mason raised the metal bar. Cole never saw where it came from. It didn't matter. What was that? Mason said. 3? Cole said nothing. Mason swung. The bar came down fast and hard, and Cole was already gone from where it expected to find him. He didn't step back. He stepped inside, toward Mason, not away. And his left hand came up and caught Mason's forearm at the wrist just past the apex of the swing, redirecting the arc so the bar skipped off the edge of a table and hit the floor instead of his skull. The motion was economical, no theatrics, just a man rerouting force the way you'd reroute water in a drainage ditch. Find where it wants to go and let it go there, just not where it was aimed. Mason stumbled forward a half step from his own momentum. In that half step, Cole had already moved. His right elbow came up and across. Not a punch, not anything that looked like a movie fight, and caught Mason in the side of the head above the ear. The sound it made was dull and flat, like a book dropped on a table. Mason's legs went briefly unreliable. He grabbed a stool on the way down and held on, which kept him from going all the way to the floor, but the bar was on the tile and his grip on it was gone, and that was what mattered. 3 seconds, start to finish. Cole stepped back, put distance between himself and Mason, turned his shoulder so he could see the room without exposing his back. The largest of Mason's men, the one who'd tipped Walter's table, a man with 4 arms like sections of pipe and a neck that didn't fully exist as a separate feature from his shoulders, came off the wall fast. No warning sound, no preamble, just movement, sudden and certain, carrying 240 pounds of intent across 12 feet of checkered tile. Cole timed him. The man was fast for his size, but fast for his size has a ceiling, and the ceiling is that big things commit when they move. They have to. The mass demands it. And once committed, they cannot change direction the way smaller things can. Cole knew this the way he knew his own breathing. It was a tactical problem with a tactical solution, and he'd solved it 100 times in training on mats that smelled like rubber and old sweat, and the particular exhaustion of men who do the same thing wrong until they do it right. He let the big man come. At the last moment, he pivoted left, 1 foot sweeping wide, and used the man's own forward momentum to redirect him into an empty booth. The big man's shoulder hit the back of the seat with enough force to crack the wooden frame. He went down in a heap between the seat and the table, hitting his chin on the edge of the table on the way, and the sound that came out of him was surprise more than pain, the sound of a man who has never in his adult life had his own momentum used against him. He didn't get up right away. Cole was already reading the room. 2 men near the door. The younger one with the tattoos running up his neck was hanging back, recalculating. The other, leather jacket, older, the one who'd been standing quietly since they came in, was watching Cole with a different quality of attention than the others. Not the loose curiosity of men watching a fight, the tight focus of a man watching a problem. Cole noted that, filed it. Walter was still at the counter, upright, both hands flat on the formica surface like he was keeping it from floating away. Dee had 1 arm around Sophie behind the counter. Sophie was watching her father with an expression Cole had never seen on her face before. He couldn't look at it for long. The 2 men near the door moved in tandem. Not coordinated. They hadn't practiced this. This wasn't that kind of organization. But proximity had given them the same idea at the same moment, and they came forward together, angling to come at Cole from slightly different directions with maybe 4 feet between them. Cole moved toward the space between the two men instead of away from it. That wasn't what they expected. People move away from threats. It's wired in. Cole had spent years unwiring it, training himself to move toward pressure instead of away, because in the tight spaces where his work used to happen, corridors, doorways, rooms that weren't meant to hold a firefight, retreating was how you died. He split the gap between them, let the one on his left commit to grabbing, and used the grabbing hand to carry that man in a half circle that put him between Cole and the second man. The second man pulled up short to avoid hitting his own partner. In that moment of adjustment, Cole wrapped one arm across the chest of the first man, used him as a brief barrier, and then released him toward the second man. They tangled. Both went sideways into a table. Coffee cups went over the edge and shattered on the floor. Dee made a sound from behind the counter. Cole didn't look. He turned back to Mason. Mason was upright again, one hand on the counter for support. The side of his face where Cole's elbow had connected was already starting to change color. A deep flush under the jaw, the kind that would look worse by morning. His eyes had changed. The performance was gone. What was underneath it wasn't fear, it was something older and less complicated. The flat, specific anger of a man who has never lost and has now, in front of 5 other men, lost something. "You have any idea," Mason said, "what I'm going to do to you?" "Yeah," Cole said. "I do." "Then you should be running." Cole looked at him. "I'm not the one who needs to run." For a moment, nothing moved in the diner. The rain hit the windows in waves. The TV in the corner still showed weather radar. The cook had disappeared from behind the pass-through window. The 3 truckers near the door had not moved from their booth, but they had moved their bodies, turned toward the wall, shoulders up, the posture of men making themselves into furniture, hoping furniture doesn't get involved. Mason straightened. His hand left the counter. He rolled his neck once and spat on the floor and looked at his remaining men. "All of them," he said. "Not all of Cole's men. All of them." The calculation had changed. Now it included Walter, and it included Sophie, and it included the waitress, and anyone else unlucky enough to be inside the Harbor Lantern at 11:47 on a Thursday night. Cole moved. Not to defend the space where he'd been standing, to change the geometry. He put himself between Mason and Walter before Mason had finished speaking, and between himself and the counter where Dee had Sophie, and what this meant in practical terms was that any line from Mason's men to Walter or to Sophie passed through Cole first. He'd done this before. Not here. Not in a diner. In darker places, tighter spaces, with worse stakes and more people trying to end him. But the geometry was the same. You don't defend everything. You position yourself so the other side has to come through you, and then you make coming through you as costly as possible. The tattooed man from the door came first this time. He'd been watching the previous 2 minutes, and he'd learned something from it. He came lower than the others had, more cautious, hands out. The stance of someone who'd been in enough actual fights to know that upright and reaching was a bad way to commit. Cole gave him credit for that. It didn't change the outcome. They engaged near the middle of the diner. The tattooed man was good, not trained, but experienced in the way that years of real violence create a kind of rough competence, and he landed a short right hand on Cole's shoulder that spun him half a step sideways and jarred his arm to the elbow. Cole felt it. He registered it and kept moving because that was the thing training gave you that experience alone didn't. The ability to take a hit without stopping, without flinching, without losing the thread of what you were doing, because in training someone had hit you much harder than this, and you'd learned that the reflex to stop and assess was a luxury that existed in comfort and nowhere else. He caught the tattooed man's follow-up with his forearm, absorbed the deflected force, and used the contact to get inside the man's reach. Up close, reach doesn't matter. Up close, it's about leverage and balance and who can take up more structural space in the other man's body. Cole redirected him toward the nearest booth and let go. The man hit the seat hard and stayed there, not unconscious, not incapacitated, but calculating, and calculating men don't charge again immediately. The quiet one, the older man in the leather jacket who'd been watching with that different quality of attention, hadn't moved. Cole clocked him again. Still watching, arms loose at his sides, no tell in his face. That one was the real problem. Cole could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. The two men who'd tangled in the table were back on their feet. One of them had a cut somewhere on his face. Cole could see blood on his chin, didn't know how it had happened, didn't matter. And the cut seemed to have made him angry in a way that the previous minute and a half had not. Angry the way people get when something that shouldn't have happened has happened to them, and the anger has nowhere rational to go. He came fast and stupid. Cole stepped aside, let him run past, helped him continue in the direction he was already going with a firm push between the shoulder blades. The man went face first into the wall beside the bathroom hallway. His nose connected with the paneling, and he sat down suddenly on the floor with both hands over his face. The second man from the table pair stopped. He looked at his partner on the floor. He looked at Cole. He looked at Mason. "You're paying me for this?" he said. Nobody answered him. Cole was breathing harder than he wanted to be. Not badly. His conditioning was still there, worn in deep enough that it wouldn't leave even after 3 years of construction work and single fatherhood, but there was a line of sweat along his collar, and his shoulder where the tattooed man had hit him was going to be dark purple by morning. He rolled it slightly. Still functional. Fine. He turned to find Mason. Mason was behind the counter. Cole had lost him for 12 seconds, and Mason had used those 12 seconds to go around the counter, and now he was on the same side of it as Dee and Sophie, and he had one hand on Dee's arm and was using her as a leverage point to keep himself between Cole and the back wall. He wasn't holding Dee the way you hold a hostage. He was holding her the way you hold a railing, just keeping himself stable, just making sure Cole couldn't move toward him in a straight line. But Sophie was 3 feet to Dee's left. She was standing very still. Her arms were at her sides. Her face was pale, and the expression on it had shifted from the one Cole had seen before. No longer just watching, now doing something more complicated, something that looked like trying to decide whether to be scared and not being able to finish making that decision. Cole stopped moving. He stood in the center of the diner with 4 of Mason's men behind him in various states of pain and non-function, and one sitting against the wall with his hands on his face. And he looked at his daughter, and for a moment that was the only thing in the room. "Hey," Mason said. He'd found something. He knew he'd found something. He could see it in Cole's stillness. "Hey, there you are." Cole said nothing. "That your kid?" Cole said nothing. "She's cute," Mason said, not as a compliment, as a coordinate. "She watching all this? That what you wanted for her tonight?" "Move away from them," Cole said. His voice was the same as it had been at the beginning of the night. Even, clear. The only difference was that it was quieter now. Quiet in the way that very cold things are quiet. "Move away," Mason said, nodding slowly. Sure, I'll move. Soon as you sit back down and let me finish what I came here to do." "What you came here to do," Cole said, "is done." "Excuse me?" "Whatever you were trying to accomplish tonight. With him." Cole tilted his head toward Walter without taking his eyes off Mason. "It's done. You lost the room. You've got one man functional and one watching to see which way this falls, and the 2 others aren't getting back in. So let's call it." Mason stared at him. "Call it," he repeated. "Walk out. Take your people. There's an exit right behind me. Nobody calls anyone tonight, and we all go home." "You think," Mason said slowly, "that you get to offer me terms." "I think," Cole said, "that you're smart enough to take them when they're good." Something moved in Mason's eyes. Not consideration, calculation. There was a difference. Consideration meant thinking about whether this was a good offer. Calculation meant thinking about what came after this room, after this night, after the damage already done to his reputation in front of these 5 men who would go talk to other men. Cole saw it happen, watched the calculation arrive at its conclusion. "You know who my father is?" Mason said. Cole said nothing. "Garrett Rourke. Rourke Development. You know that name?" Dee closed her eyes briefly. "My father owns half this county," Mason said. "He's got 3 attorneys on retainer who go to work before breakfast. He's got relationships with the sheriff's department going back 15 years. He let that land. "You put hands on me and 5 other people in a public place. I've got witnesses." He gestured around the room. "You hit a man with a metal bar. You swung first. That's what you say happened." Cole looked at him, steady. "That's what happened." "Funny how that works," Mason said. "My father makes a call in the morning. His attorneys come in. You're looking at assault charges, 5 counts minimum. You're an ex-military guy, right? He tilted his head. I can see it. Something about how you stand. They love to make examples of ex-military guys who think the rules don't apply. And you've got a daughter. He paused deliberately. Be a shame. Sophie was watching Cole. Not Mason, just Cole. Her eyes were dry and steady, and there was something in them that he recognized because he'd seen it in his own face in mirrors at 3 in the morning in places he never talked about. The specific look of someone who has decided not to panic because panic is not available to them as an option. His 10-year-old daughter was making that decision. And something about that fact, something specific and irreversible about watching Sophie arrive at a kind of stillness that no 10-year-old should have to find, that landed on Cole in a way that none of the last 15 minutes had. Not anger. Not the hot variety anyway. Something colder. More structural. He walked around the counter. Mason tensed. His hand on Dee's arm tightened. Cole stopped 2 feet from him and looked at him at eye level and said, very quietly, let go of her arm. Or what? Or I stop giving you options. The quiet man in the leather jacket spoke for the first time, from across the diner without moving. Mason. Mason didn't look at him. Mason. Again, just the name, but something in the tone of it. Mason looked at Cole for a long moment. Then he let go of Dee's arm. He took a step back, smoothed the front of his jacket. His face had reorganized itself into something more composed, the performance returning, the mask clicking back into place over whatever was underneath. He looked at Cole with the expression of a man who has decided this isn't over, but is also capable of choosing the terrain for the next engagement. You made a mistake tonight, Mason said. Maybe, Cole said. You should have minded your business. Probably. My father is going to make a call. I heard you. Mason held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the door, adjusting his jacket, stepping over a chair that had fallen during the last 10 minutes without looking down, moving through the wreckage of the Harbor Lantern's Thursday night, with the careful, deliberate dignity of a man who intends for everyone present to believe he is choosing to leave. His men followed in fragments. The one against the wall with his hands on his face had to be helped by the tattooed man. The big one who'd gone into the booth was upright, moving slowly, not speaking. The man who'd asked about his pay left without looking at anyone. The quiet one in the leather jacket was the last to go. He paused at the door. He looked back at Cole across the length of the diner, through the overturned chairs and the broken cups and the coffee soaking into the grout between the tiles. He held Cole's gaze for a second longer than anything else that had happened tonight, and then he pushed through the door and was gone. The room was very quiet, rain on the windows, the TV still running. The cook had reappeared at the pass-through window and was looking at the room the way people look at things they know they'll be telling stories about. Dee exhaled. It was the first sound anyone made. Sophie walked out from behind the counter and stopped in front of Cole. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. He noticed that his hands were completely still. He noticed that hers were too, though he could see from the small muscles in her jaw that she was working at it. You okay? He said. She thought about it. Honest consideration, like she always did. Yeah, she said. You? His shoulder hurt. His knuckles were scraped from somewhere. The wall, maybe, he hadn't noticed. And there was a ringing in his right ear that would probably pass. Fine, he said. You didn't look fine, she said. You looked like… She stopped. Like what? She looked at him for a long moment. Like someone I didn't know, she said. And then, before he could say anything, but I knew it was you. Cole put his hand on the top of her head. Once. Then he turned to look at the diner. The real damage, just chairs and cups and a broken booth. And then at Walter, who was still at the counter with both hands flat on the formica, upright, present, unhurt. Walter, Cole said. Yeah, the old man said. His voice came out a little rough. You should call someone, tonight. Whatever it is Mason wanted from you, you should get ahead of it. Walter looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. Not gratitude, not exactly. Something more complicated than that. The look of a man who knows he has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been seen doing it. I'll make some calls, Walter said. Cole nodded. He turned and started picking up chairs. Dee stood in the middle of the diner watching him. She opened her mouth once, closed it, then she got a mop from the back. Sophie picked up a coffee cup that wasn't broken, set it on the nearest table, picked up another. None of them spoke for a while. The rain kept coming. The harbor was out there somewhere in the dark, and the fishing boats were still in the mist, and whatever Mason Rourke was going to do next morning with his father's telephone and his father's attorneys was coming the way weather comes, invisible for now, certain in a few hours, nothing to be done about it tonight. Cole worked his way around the diner, setting things right, one chair at a time. His shoulder throbbed. The ringing in his ear was fading. He moved carefully because his body had been through 15 minutes of things it hadn't been through in 3 years, and careful was the honest speed. At some point, Sophie was beside him. She grabbed the other end of a table he was writing. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Who taught you that stuff?" He set the table down, checked it was level. "A lot of people," he said. "Like who?" "Nobody you'd know." She thought about that. "Were they good people?" Cole considered the question with more seriousness than she'd probably expected. "Some of them," he said. Sophie nodded like that was an acceptable answer, which it wasn't, but she let it go. The way she let a lot of things go, banking them for later, for some other night when the timing was better and she could come back with the real question. The front door opened. Cole turned. A Redwood Bay patrol car had pulled into the lot, its light bar dark, and a deputy in a rain jacket was pushing through the door with one hand on the frame and the other resting, not on his weapon, but close, and his eyes going immediately to Cole in the way that eyes go to the person who looks like they belong to the disorder. "Somebody called in a disturbance," the deputy said. Cole stood in the center of the wrecked diner with a chair in his hands and looked at the deputy and thought about what the morning was going to look like, and he put the chair down slowly and said, "Yeah, there was a disturbance." "You involved?" Behind the deputy, through the diner window, Cole could see the parking lot, the patrol car, the dark road beyond it. No other cars. Mason's vehicles were already gone, had been gone for the better part of 10 minutes, and the lot was empty except for Cole's truck and Walter's. Cole looked at the deputy. "Yeah," he said, "I was involved." The deputy's name was Carver. He was maybe 32, 33, with the particular build of someone who'd played college ball and kept most of it. He had a notepad out before he'd finished clearing the doorway, which told Cole he was the kind of man who led with procedure when he wasn't sure what he was walking into. He stood in the entrance of the harbor lantern and looked at the room slowly. Overturned table, broken cups on the floor, a booth with a cracked frame, napkin holders in places. Napkin holders weren't supposed to be. D with a mop, a 10-year-old girl holding a coffee cup, an old man at the counter with a coffee stain on his shirt, and Cole Barrett standing in the middle of it all with scraped knuckles and a shoulder that was starting to stiffen. Carver's eyes came back to Cole. "You want to tell me what happened here?" 6 men came in, Cole said. "They harassed this gentleman." He nodded toward Walter. "When I intervened, they became physical." "You intervened?" "Yes." 6 men. "Yes." Carver looked at him, wrote something in the notepad. "And where are these 6 men now?" "They left," Cole said. "About 10, 12 minutes ago. 3 vehicles. I didn't get plates." Nobody got plates. Carver looked around the room, at the truckers who'd become furniture, at the young couple who'd put their phone away and were now staring at the table. He looked at Dee. "Ma'am, you see what happened?" Dee leaned on the mop. She had the expression of a woman measuring something carefully before she spent it. "I was mostly behind the counter," she said. Carver waited. "I saw the one named Rourke knock over an old man's coffee," she said. "And I saw this man," she tilted her head at Cole, "try to get them to leave before anything happened." "Rourke," Carver said. He wrote it down without reaction, which was itself a kind of reaction. "Mason Rourke," Walter said from the counter. His voice had settled. "You know the name?" Carver looked at the old man. "I know a lot of names, sir." "I'm sure you do." There was a pause. Something in the exchange had an older shape to it, the shape of a conversation that was already in the middle of something when it started, and Carver seemed to know it. He clicked his pen, looked back at Cole. "I'm going to need your ID, and I'm going to need you to walk me through this from the beginning." Cole reached into his jacket, handed over his license. Carver looked at it and wrote down the information in his notepad without expression, and Cole watched the man's face and saw the moment, just a flicker, when something in the address or the name or the record check running behind the deputy's eyes produced a small flag. Nothing visible. just a slight stillness, the way a screen pauses before it loads. Cole Barrett, Carver said. Yes. You live over on Pell Road? Rent a place there. How long you been in Redwood Bay? 3 years? Carver looked up from the notepad, studied Cole for a moment with a calibrated neutrality that was professional enough to be almost convincing. What do you do for work? Construction. Framing, mostly. Contract work. Carver looked at the room again, at the cracked booth, at the man Cole's size who'd produced this result against 6 people. And before construction? Cole met his eyes. Navy. Carver wrote it down. Long? Long enough? Another pause. Carver clicked his pen twice and looked at his notepad and then at Sophie, who was watching him from near the counter with that same waiting stillness. Something shifted in Carver's posture. Not sympathy, exactly. Professional acknowledgement. He looked at Cole. She yours? Yes. She see this? Some of it. Carver breathed through his nose, wrote something. Cole couldn't see what. I'm going to need a full statement from you tonight, and I may need to follow up. Are you going to be accessible? I live here, Cole said. I'm accessible. All right. Carver put the notepad away. He looked at the room one more time, taking it in as evidence even if he wasn't treating it that way yet. Then he looked at Cole with an expression that wasn't quite readable. You should know, he said, that if the other parties file a report tonight, this gets more complicated. Cole looked at him. I know. Just want to be clear about that. You're clear, Cole said. Carver nodded. Left his card on the counter near Walter. Took a set of quick statements from the truckers who'd been furniture and got what he probably expected, which was very little. He talked to Dee for 3 minutes. He talked to Walter for 5, and that conversation was quieter than the others. Cole couldn't hear it fully, but he could see Walter's face, and Walter's face was saying more than Walter was saying. Carver left at 12:34 a.m. He didn't make any arrests. He didn't indicate he was going to. He just drove back out into the rain, and his taillights disappeared around the curve on Route 9, and the harbor lantern sat quiet again with rain on its windows, and the TV still showing weather. Cole and Sophie were on the road by 1 o'clock. Sophie fell asleep 11 minutes into the drive. He knew this because her breathing changed, slowed, deepened, and her head tipped toward the window by degrees, the way it always did when she finally let herself go. She'd held it together all the way through the diner, all the way through Carver's questions, all the way through the parking lot in the rain. And then, in the truck, in the dark, with the road unspooling ahead of them and nothing left to hold together, she let go. Cole drove with one hand on the wheel and watched the road and didn't listen to the radio. His shoulder had stiffened to the point where raising his arm above chest height produced a grinding ache he recognized. He'd had it before. It would work itself out in 4 or 5 days if he stretched it. 2 weeks if he didn't. He'd stretch it. He had framing work Thursday and couldn't afford the limitation. He thought about Carver's face when he'd written down the name. He thought about the quiet man in the leather jacket who'd been last out the door. The one who hadn't charged. The one who'd been watching. He thought about Walter Briggs sitting at that counter every Thursday night, the same stool, the same cup, and whatever it was he was carrying that had made Mason Rourke drive 6 men to a roadside diner in the rain at midnight to humiliate him in front of strangers. Whatever you came here to do is done. He'd said it, and he'd believed it in the moment, and now, in the dark, on the wet road home, he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. But the call came at 6:18 a.m. Cole was already awake. He'd been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold while he listened to the rain on the roof and thought about very little and several things simultaneously, which was a mode of thinking he'd developed in other contexts where it had been called situational awareness, and in civilian life didn't have a name at all. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, Oregon area code. Yeah, he said. Mr. Barrett. A man's voice, smooth, unhurried. The voice of someone who made calls like this regularly and had long since stopped finding them interesting. My name is Jeffrey Marsh. I'm calling on behalf of Rourke Development and the Rourke family. Do you have a few minutes? Cole looked at the window. The rain had stopped overnight. The morning outside was the particular flat gray of Oregon coast mornings in late autumn. Everything the same color, no shadows. The light distributed evenly like it had given up having an opinion. Sure, he said. I'll be direct, Marsh said. There was an incident last evening at a diner on Route 9. You were involved. My client was involved. There were injuries. Your client threw the first punch, Cole said. That's your account. That's what happened. Mr. Barrett. A pause. Not uncertain, just the pause of a man organizing what he wants to say. We're not interested in pursuing this adversarially. What we're interested in is a clean resolution. There's a path here where everyone walks away without legal complications. What's the path? A mutual non-disclosure. Both parties agree not to pursue charges or civil claims. Both parties agree to have had no interaction last evening. This becomes a non-event for everyone involved. Cole picked up his coffee cup, put it down. What about Walter Briggs? A brief silence, longer than the others. Mr. Briggs isn't party to this conversation. He was party to last night. Mr. Briggs has his own situation to navigate, Marsh said carefully. What we're discussing is yours. Cole thought about that. About the specific language. His own situation. Not a threat, not quite. Just a coordinate, like Mason had given him the night before. Be a shame. I'm going to need to think about it, Cole said. Of course. Marsh's voice didn't change. I'd encourage you not to think too long. My client is a patient man, but these windows tend to close. And Mr. Barrett, another pause. I understand you have a daughter. The review process for child welfare can be very disruptive even when there's no underlying issue. Just something to keep in mind. Cole sat with the phone against his ear and the gray morning light in the window and let the words land where they were meant to land. I'll be in touch, he said. He hung up. He sat for a long time at the kitchen table, long enough for the coffee to get colder, long enough for Sophie to get up and come downstairs in her socks and her oversized sweatshirt and stand in the kitchen doorway, looking at him the way she did sometimes, reading whatever the room had to offer before she decided how to enter it. Who was that? She said. Nobody important. She looked at his face. Okay, she said, in the tone that meant she'd file it. She got herself cereal. He watched her move around the kitchen, the efficient, slightly preoccupied movements of a person who knows a space well, who belongs in it. And he thought about the word disruptive and what it meant in the mouth of a man like Jeffrey Marsh, and what it would mean in the life of a 10-year-old girl who had already arranged her world carefully around the particular stability that Cole had spent 3 years building. He got up and put his cold coffee in the sink and made fresh. The call from the county assessor's office came 4 days later. Cole was on a roof in the north end of town, nailing sheathing in the kind of thin November cold that gets into your hands an hour in and stays. He had his phone in his jacket pocket on vibrate, and he felt it go 3 times in the space of an hour before he could get down to call back. The assessor's office had questions about his property taxes, specifically about an overpayment from 2 years ago that had apparently generated a lien complication that would need to be resolved in person at the county seat in Harlan, 40 minutes south, during business hours. Cole stood on the ground next to the job site with a nail gun in his hand and listened to the woman explain it and knew it was nothing, the kind of administrative friction that took a phone call and a form to clear, and also knew it was not nothing because 2 years ago there had been no overpayment issue and 40 minutes south during business hours meant taking half a day off work. He couldn't bill back. He called his contractor, got the time off, drove to Harlan, spent 2.5 hours at the assessor's office being moved between desks before a supervisor appeared and looked at his file, and spent 12 minutes finding what turned out to be a data entry error on the county's end. Cole drove back to Redwood Bay and got to the job site at 3:40 and worked until dark. 3 days after that, Sophie's school called, not her teacher, the vice principal. There had been a complaint, anonymous, suggesting that Sophie had arrived at school on multiple occasions with unexplained bruising. The school was required to document all such complaints. A counselor would need to speak with Sophie, separately from Cole. Cole sat in the parking lot of the school for 4 minutes after he hung up the phone. He sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the windshield and very carefully did not think about the things he was capable of, because those things lived in a room he'd closed and locked and put distance between himself and the only way they stayed locked was if he didn't stand too close to the door. He thought instead about Sophie, about the fact that she had bruises right now because she'd caught her forearm on the kitchen counter 2 weeks ago, reaching for something on the top shelf, and it had gone green and yellow in the specific ugly way of bruising on fair skin, and that this was the bruising the counselor would see, and that the counselor would see it having already received a complaint, and that this was how things worked when someone with resources and patience and Jeffrey Marsh decided to turn the volume up. He called Walter. The phone rang 4 times. Then, "Yeah, it's Cole Barrett." A pause. "Cole." Walter's voice was different than it had been in the diner, quieter, something compressed in it. "I figured you'd call. Are you okay?" "I'm standing in my garage looking at my own tools," Walter said, "which I've been doing for 40 years, so yeah, I'm standing. They called you." "Not Marsh, different one. Younger guy. Wanted to know if I'd reconsidered." "Reconsidered what?" "Selling," Walter said simply. Cole waited. "I got a shop," Walter said. "Corner of Dunbar and 5th. Been there 31 years. Rourke Development wants the lot. Whole block, actually. Part of their waterfront project." He paused. "I told them no the first time 8 months ago. Then things started happening." "What kind of things?" "Nothing big. Not at first. Health inspector shows up. 3 times in 2 months. City says my signage violates a new ordinance. My insurance company drops me. After 19 years, just drops me. I get it all sorted out every time, but sorting it out costs money and it costs time. And it costs the kind of energy that an old man—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I kept saying no. And Thursday night." "Thursday night was a message," Walter said. "Mason doesn't usually show up himself. He usually sends the quiet one." Cole went still. "The one in the leather jacket." A pause. "You noticed him?" "Hard not to." "His name is Tanner," Walter said. "Ray Tanner. He's the one who—" Walter stopped again. "He's the reason I kept the documents." "What documents?" Walter was quiet for a moment. Cole could hear him breathing, could hear something in the background. A radio, maybe, or the ambient sound of a garage, compressors and metal, and the smell of oil that you could almost hear in a place like that. "I had a customer," Walter said. 18 months ago. Guy named Pruitt. Owned a flower shop on the waterfront. Rourke wanted his lot too. Pruitt told me about it, showed me some paperwork they'd given him. Offers, then lowball offers, then something that looked like a lease buyout but wasn't quite. I made copies. Then Pruitt sold. Got a price that wasn't right, wasn't what the property was worth, but he sold." Another pause. 3 months later, I had 2 more customers. Different businesses, same block, tell me the same story. Different details, same shape. Cole looked at the school parking lot. A minivan had pulled in and a woman was getting out and gathering a small child from the back seat. The ordinary choreography of an ordinary afternoon. And he watched it the way you watch something from outside of it. "Walter, you need to give those documents to someone." "I know." "Not tomorrow. Tonight." "I've been thinking about who," Walter said. "Not local," Cole said. "Not county. If Rourke's got relationships with the sheriff's department." "State," Walter said. "I know someone at the AG's office. Old customer. His dad used to bring his truck in." He paused. "I've been sitting on this because, I don't know. I thought it would go away." "It's not going to go away." "No," Walter said. "I know that now." "Make the call tonight." "Yeah." "And Walter." Cole paused. "Is there a camera on your property, shop, truck, anywhere?" Another pause. Longer. "My truck," Walter said slowly. "I've got a dash cam. Old thing. I mostly run it for insurance purposes. It's been running—" He stopped mid-sentence. Cole waited. "It was parked on the lot outside the diner," Walter said, "Thursday night." "Was it running?" "It runs automatically when I park within a certain distance of any other vehicle. Motion triggered. Some features of these things I don't fully understand." He paused again. "I haven't looked at it." "Look at it tonight," Cole said, "before you call anyone. Look at it and then call." "All right," Walter said. Cole hung up and sat in the parking lot for another minute. Then he got out of the truck and went inside the school to meet with the vice principal and explain about the kitchen counter and the top shelf. And he sat across the desk from a woman who was doing her job. And he answered her questions carefully, and he did not say what he knew about why this conversation was happening. The state investigator's name was Paulson. She drove up from Salem in a gray sedan and met Walter at his shop on a Thursday. The next Thursday, exactly 1 week after the harbor lantern. And she was there for 3 hours, during which time Cole sat in his truck 2 blocks away because Walter had called him that morning and said simply, "I'd feel better if you weren't too far." Cole didn't know what that meant exactly. He sat in his truck and drank coffee from a thermos and watched the block. Nothing happened. A woman walked a dog. A delivery truck came and went. The gray sedan stayed parked in front of Walter's shop. Paulson came out at 2:15. She was early 50s, gray at the temples, the build and carriage of someone who walked fast and had for a long time. She stood on the sidewalk outside the shop and made 2 phone calls, both short, both made while looking at the middle distance with the focused inward expression of someone processing information against a larger framework they're carrying in their head. Cole watched her. She didn't look in his direction. She got in the gray sedan and drove south. Walter called him 5 minutes later. "She took everything," he said. "Copies or originals?" "Both. She photographed the originals and took them. Said she'd send receipts." "What did she say about the footage?" "She said," Walter paused. "She said it was, quote, significantly useful. Then she asked me how it happened to be running." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. I parked outside the diner and went in for coffee and forgot I'd turned the auto sense back on after my last insurance claim." Cole almost said something and didn't. The fact that Walter had forgotten the camera was running was the most useful thing that had happened since Thursday. Evidence that doesn't know it's evidence is the only kind that can't be staged. "Did she say anything about the charges?" Cole said. "Which charges?" "Against me." A pause. "She said she wasn't in a position to speak to that." Cole stared through the windshield. The woman with the dog was coming back the other way. "All right," he said. "Cole." Walter's voice was different now, slower. "The documents I gave her, the pressure campaign against the other businesses, and the footage," he stopped. "Yeah. It doesn't just show what happened Thursday. It shows Mason arriving. It shows them getting out of the cars. It shows—" Another pause. "It shows Tanner handing something to Mason before they went in, something from inside his jacket." Cole absorbed that. "The bar," he said. "The bar," Walter said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Call me if anything changes," Cole said. "You'll be the third call I make," Walter said, "after my daughter and the AG's office." Cole drove home. He made dinner, pasta, because it was fast and Sophie liked it, and they ate at the kitchen table and Sophie talked about a project she had due on Friday, and Cole listened and asked questions and helped her think through the parts she was stuck on. And it was a completely ordinary evening, and he wanted it badly enough that he was careful not to grip it too hard. After Sophie went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table again with his phone and a piece of paper and wrote down, in order, everything he knew. It wasn't a long list. It didn't need to be. The shape of it was already clear. Rourke Development wanted a block of the Redwood Bay waterfront. Walter Briggs was one of the last holdouts. The campaign against him had been running for 8 months. Thursday night had been an escalation, a visible, public one, which suggested either that the timeline had compressed or that someone had made a bad decision. Tanner handing Mason something before they went in. That was the bad decision. That was premeditation on tape, and whoever had decided to make it visible had either been arrogant or sloppy or both. And arrogance and sloppiness in a criminal operation were the same thing expressed differently. Cole folded the piece of paper in half, then in half again. Then he put it in his jacket pocket where it would either become relevant or not. He thought about Paulson driving south. He thought about the footage. He thought about Jeffrey Marsh and the word disruptive, and the anonymous complaint to Sophie's school, and the assessor's office in Harlan, and the 3 visits from the health inspector and the insurance company dropping Walter after 19 years. He thought about the quiet man in the leather jacket watching him from across the harbor lantern with an attention that hadn't been anger and hadn't been fear and hadn't been anything Cole had a clean name for yet. There was a knock at his front door at 9:47 p.m. Cole crossed the room without turning on more lights. He looked through the side window before he touched the handle. Deputy Carver stood on his porch in plain clothes, jeans, a jacket, no hat, which meant he was off duty, with rain on his shoulders and his hands in his pockets and an expression that was doing the specific work of not expressing anything. Cole opened the door. "Deputy," he said. "I'm off the clock," Carver said. He looked at Cole steadily. This isn't an official visit. Okay. Can I come in? Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. Carver came inside and stood in the entry hallway and looked at the living room. Modest, clean, a stack of Sophie's school books on the coffee table, a reading lamp on, with the same methodical attention he'd used on the diner a week ago. Taking inventory. Not critically, just noting what was here. You want coffee? Cole said. Sure. They sat at the kitchen table. Cole set 2 cups down and sat across from Carver and waited. Carver wrapped both hands around his cup. There's going to be a filing, he said. Tomorrow or the next day. 5 counts of assault. Rourke's attorneys have been at the county DA's office since Tuesday. Cole said nothing. The DA is Dan Pritchard, Carver said. He and Garrett Rourke have been at the same Rotary Club for 8 years. He looked at Cole over his cup. I'm telling you that as a statement of fact, not as a statement of what it means. I understand, Cole said. The footage situation is complicated, Carver said. There's dash cam footage from a private vehicle. The state investigator, Paulson, out of Salem, has it. But the timing of how it enters any local proceeding is a legal question that takes time. How much time? I don't know. Not my lane. He paused. What is my lane is the statement I took from you at the diner, and the statement from the waitress, and the statement from... He stopped. Cole waited. Carver set his cup down. Walter Briggs is not well regarded at the department, he said carefully. He's made complaints about the Rourke Development Project, about how those complaints were handled. Some people there think he's a crank. He paused. I don't think he's a crank. Cole looked at him. Why are you here, Deputy? Carver was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee cup. I've been at this department for 6 years, he said. Before that I was in Medford. Before that I was in the Army. He looked up. 2 tours. Cole said nothing. I got out in 2019, Carver said. Tried to figure out what to do with myself. Ended up here. He shrugged. It's not a perfect fit. Nothing is. He paused. But there's a difference between a department that has problems and a department that's been purchased. I know which one I'm working in, and I know which one it's starting to look like. Cole sat with that. Outside the kitchen window, the rain had started again, light and thin, barely audible. The filing is going to come, Carver said, and it's going to have language in it about Sophie, about her presence at the scene. The attorneys are going to frame it as endangerment. Something in Cole's chest tightened. He let it, didn't show it. They're going to argue, Carver continued, that a man with your background, just your specific military background, chose to engage 6 individuals in a public place with a minor present. That's the frame they're building. What's the counterframe? Cole said. Carver looked at him. The footage, he said, and Walter Briggs, and the 2 other witnesses I spoke to that night who didn't give me much but might give a state investigator more. And he stopped. And, Cole said. Carver reached into his jacket and put a business card on the table. Not his own. A name Cole didn't recognize, with a Salem address and a state AG's office header. Paulson left that with me this afternoon, Carver said. Unofficial. Said if the Barrett situation became active, I should make sure Barrett had the number. Cole looked at the card. Didn't pick it up yet. She's moving on the Rourke Development Project, Carver said. Bigger than just Thursday night. The business pressure campaign, the land acquisition irregularities. It's a full investigation. He paused. That's good. But it takes time. And time is what you may not have if the local DA moves fast. Cole picked up the card. He turned it over. Nothing on the back. Why did Paulson give this to you and not to me directly? He said. Carver thought about it. Because giving it to you directly established a connection between you and the investigation. Giving it through me keeps that ambiguous. He paused. She's careful. She's smart, Cole said. Yeah, Carver said. She is. Cole set the card on the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Carver. You know what you're doing coming here tonight, he said. Yes, Carver said. If it comes out, I know, Carver said. He picked up his coffee cup, put it down without drinking, stood. Get an attorney, he said. Not county. Someone from Portland, tonight if you can. He buttoned his jacket. And get somewhere where Sophie is for the next few days, somewhere visible. School, neighbors, activities, documented normal. You understand what I'm saying? I understand, Cole said. Carver nodded. He moved toward the door and Cole walked with him and opened it. The rain came in lightly. Carver stepped out onto the porch and turned. One more thing, he said. The man in the leather jacket. Tanner. Cole waited. He was picked up this morning, Carver said. Not by us. State police. Apparently Paulson didn't wait on everything. Cole absorbed that. What for? Outstanding warrant from Coos County, Carver said. Witness intimidation. Different case, different business owner. Same general pattern. He looked at Cole steadily. He's a talker, apparently. When he's scared enough. Carver stepped off the porch into the rain. He walked to his car, a personal vehicle, an old Camry, without looking back. He got in. Cole stood in the doorway and watched the taillights back out of his short driveway and pull away down Pell Road and disappear. He stood there for a moment after. The rain was thin and cold and fell without opinion on the porch railing and the front walk and the rusted mailbox his landlord had never fixed, and the street and everything else equally. Cole went inside. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at Paulson's card for a while. Then he went upstairs and looked in at Sophie, who was asleep in her room with one arm off the edge of the bed and her hair across her face and her mouth slightly open. He watched her breathe for a moment. Just that. The specific, uncomplicated fact of her breathing in her own bed in her own room in a house that was still, for now, hers. He went back downstairs and found a Portland attorney's number on his phone. Looked at the time, 10:22 p.m., too late to call, first thing in the morning. He wrote it on the piece of paper in his jacket pocket, next to everything else he knew. Then he sat in the kitchen and listened to the rain, and he thought about Tanner in a state police interview room being scared enough to talk. And he thought about Paulson driving south in her gray sedan with Walter's documents and Walter's dash cam footage and the shape of something larger than a Thursday night at a diner taking form in her careful, methodical hands. And he thought, it might be all right, not certain, not clean, not the kind of resolution that arrives without leaving marks. But the possible shape of all right, visible from here, if you squinted against the rain and the late hour and the particular weight of having a daughter asleep upstairs, whose life you'd been handed and had no intention of mishandling, it might be all right. He sat with that for a while. It was the most he'd let himself have in a long time, and even that felt like too much to hold on to, so he just let it sit on the table next to the attorney's number and Paulson's card and his cold coffee, and he listened to the rain and he waited for morning. The Portland attorney's name was Renata Souza, and she called back at 7:53 a.m. before Cole had finished his first cup of coffee. He'd left a message at 7:40 on a number attached to a firm called Souza and Lim that Carver's business card had led him to, circuitously, through a Portland legal aid referral that specialized in civil rights cases and excessive force claims, and the particular kind of legal geography where military veterans ended up when systems that were supposed to be neutral turned out not to be. He hadn't expected a callback inside 2 hours. Souza called inside 13 minutes. Tell me what happened, she said. No preamble, no pleasantries. The voice of someone whose time was not a resource she wasted. Cole told her. All of it. He stood in the kitchen while Sophie ate cereal, and he kept his voice low and his account sequential, and he did not editorialize. Just the facts in the order they occurred. The diner. Mason. Walter. Carver. The calls, the school complaint, the assessor's office. Carver coming to his door. Paulson. Tanner. Souza listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a silence of maybe 4 seconds, which was the silence of someone arranging information into its most useful shape. Okay, she said. A few things. First, don't talk to anyone from the DA's office, the sheriff's department, or Rourke's attorneys without me present. Anyone. If they show up at your door, you say your attorney will be in contact and you close the door. Understood. Second, the school situation. You need a written statement from whatever physician has seen Sophie in the last year. Routine visits, any urgent care, anything. Establishing the context of any bruising. Get that today. I can do that. Third, what's your relationship with Deputy Carver? Cole thought about how to characterize it. He came to me voluntarily, off the record. Does he know that's how you'd describe it? Yes. And Paulson, the state investigator. I've never met her. Everything I know about her came through Carver. But she left you her number. Through Carver. Sousa was quiet for a moment. She's building something, she said, and she's insulating it. She doesn't want you in direct contact with her investigation because it creates a pathway for Rourke's people to argue contamination. A pause. That's actually good news. It means she has something worth insulating. That's what I thought. The assault filing. If it comes today, which it probably will, I'm going to move immediately to get the dashcam footage entered as exculpatory evidence. The timing matters because once the DA has it, dismissal becomes his choice to make instead of his obligation. Another pause. Dan Pritchard. Carver mentioned him. I know Pritchard, Sousa said. He's not a bad man. He's a cautious man. There's a difference. Cautious men make decisions based on where the weight is. Right now, the weight is on Rourke's side because Rourke is the only one who's formally shown up. When we show up, the weight redistributes. She stopped. I'm going to need to come to Redwood Bay. When? This afternoon if the filing comes through. Tomorrow morning at the latest. Can you be available? Yes. And Cole. Her voice didn't shift in tone, but something behind it changed slightly. The Navy background, your specific background, they're going to use it. I know. They're going to argue specialized training, disproportionate response, endangerment of a minor. The counterargument isn't that your training didn't give you those capabilities. It's about what you did with them, and specifically what you didn't do with them. We're going to need to establish that clearly and early. Cole said nothing. I've worked with veterans, Sousa said. I know how that argument usually lands with a jury. The prosecution tries to make the training sound like a threat. Our job is to make it sound like a choice, because it was a choice. You had options, and you chose the most restrained ones available to you. A pause. Was that true? Cole thought about the 15 minutes in the harbor lantern. He thought about the moments when things could have ended faster and harder and didn't, because he'd kept making the choice to redirect instead of stop, to contain instead of incapacitate, to move people away from the problem instead of through it. He thought about the man who'd reached for Walter, the one who'd moved toward Sophie. Yes, he said. That was true. Then we have something to work with, Sousa said. I'll call you when I'm on the road. She hung up. Cole set the phone down on the counter. Sophie was watching him over her cereal bowl with the expression she'd been refining since she was about 7, the one that said she'd been listening to the half of the conversation she could hear and had assembled most of the other half from context. What? He said. Are we in trouble? Cole looked at her. He had a rule about this, about her questions, about the questions she was old enough to ask now that had real weight to them. He didn't lie to her. He'd made that decision when she was 4, and it had cost him sometimes, and he'd never once regretted it. Some, he said, not the kind we can't handle. Is it because of Thursday night? Yes. She looked at her cereal, stirred it once. Are they coming after you because of what you did? They're trying to make what I did look bad, he said. There's a difference. She thought about that. Is it the man from the diner, the one who was his father, Cole said. Mostly. She nodded slowly. The way she nodded when she was adding something to a longer understanding, not when she was satisfied. Dad. Yeah. You didn't do anything wrong. He looked at her. I know that. Then why does it matter what they say? Cole picked up his coffee. Because what people say has weight even when it's wrong, he said. That's why we have lawyers. Sophie seemed to find this answer acceptable in the particular way she found unsatisfying answers acceptable, not because they answered the question, but because they were honest about the limits. She picked up her bowl and took it to the sink. I have school, she said. I know. I'll drive you. You don't have to. I'll drive you. She didn't argue. The filing came through at 11:18 a.m. Sousa texted him a copy 20 minutes later. He read it on his phone in the cab of his truck in the parking lot of the hardware store where he'd gone to pick up materials for Thursday's job, which he was now probably not going to make. 5 counts of assault in the 2nd degree. The language was dense and specific and had clearly been drafted by someone who'd done this before. It laid out the incident at the Harbor Lantern in terms that Cole recognized the events of but didn't recognize the shape of: a man with extensive military combat training who had escalated a verbal dispute into physical violence against 5 individuals and had done so in the presence of his minor child. He read the endangerment language twice. It was one paragraph. It was carefully worded, and it was the part that made his vision go slightly narrow at the edges, the way it did when something required full attention. He called Sousa. I read it, she said before he could speak. The endangerment language. I see it. That's the part they're going to push. Yes, she said, and we're going to push back. I'm leaving Portland in 40 minutes. Meet me at... A pause, the sound of typing. The Harbor Coffee on Main Street in Redwood Bay at 3? I'll be there. And Cole. A pause. Has anyone from Child Services contacted you yet? The word yet sat in the sentence like something she'd put there carefully. No, he said. They might, she said, depending on whether Rourke's attorneys make a separate referral. If anyone contacts you about Sophie, anyone, school counselor, social services, anyone presenting as welfare-related, you call me immediately. You don't answer questions, you don't explain, you just call me. Understood. He sat in the truck for a while after he hung up. The hardware store parking lot was mundane and ordinary and smelled like lumber and motor oil and the particular kind of cold that arrived in Oregon in November without ceremony. 2 men were loading bags of concrete mix into a pickup 2 spaces over. A woman was returning a cart. Everything was doing what it normally did. Cole put his truck in reverse and backed out. Whooped. Sousa was already at the table when he arrived at Harbor Coffee at 2:58. She was in her mid-40s, Portuguese-American, with reading glasses pushed up into dark hair and a laptop open and a legal pad covered in handwriting beside it. She had a black coffee and nothing else, and she was reading something on the laptop with the focused, rapid attention of a person who reads 4 times faster than they need to. She looked up when Cole came in. Took him in. He sat down across from her. Coffee? She said. Have some. She nodded. Turned the laptop to face him. I want to go through the footage first, she said. Walter Briggs forwarded it to me this morning. I've been through it twice. I need you to watch it with me and tell me if anything in it contradicts what you told me this morning. It won't. Humor me. She played it without sound. The Harbor Lantern's lot from the angle of Walter's truck, the camera mounted inside the windshield facing out, a wide-angle lens that caught most of the lot, and the lower third of the diner's front windows. The timestamp in the corner read, in military format, 23:31:04. Cole watched Mason's vehicles pull in, watched the 6 men get out, watched Tanner reach into his jacket and remove something, slim, metallic, short, and hand it to Mason before they went to the door. Mason tucked it inside his jacket without looking at it, the practiced motion of someone receiving something familiar. He watched them go inside. The next 43 minutes were the parking lot. Nothing moving, rain on the windshield of Walter's truck slightly obscuring the image. Then, at 00:14:37, Cole watched Mason's vehicles leave. 2 cars and a truck, departing within 3 minutes of each other, Mason's car last. Then at 00:23:09, Carver's patrol car. Then at 00:58:44, Cole's truck and Walter's truck leaving together. Sousa closed the laptop. The handoff, she said. That's premeditation. That's conspiracy to commit. That's not a bar Mason picked up spontaneously inside. No. Tanner's already in custody. If he talks... Carver said he talks when he's scared enough. Good. She wrote something on the legal pad. The angle on the front windows. There's about a 40% view of the interior from that camera's position. Not enough to clearly see individual actions inside, but enough to establish that Cole Barrett was positioned in the interior near the back of the diner for the majority of the incident. She tapped her pen. Which means you weren't near the door, which means you weren't blocking their exit. Cole looked at her. One of the assault claims, she said, is that you trapped them and attacked. No exit available. Aggressor behavior. She looked up. The footage shows their vehicles in the lot the entire time. Nobody prevented them from leaving. Their vehicles were there, keys in pockets, exit unblocked. They didn't try to leave, Cole said. I know. The footage supports that. She wrote more. Tell me about your record. Full history. Deployments, commendations, any disciplinary... 1, Cole said. She looked up. 2016. Kandahar. I was cited for acting without authorization during an extraction. The mission went outside its parameters. I made a call my CO hadn't cleared. What was the call? The target house had civilians in it, women, 2 children. The extraction plan didn't account for them. I called an audible, delayed the extraction by 11 minutes to get them clear before the breach. Souza looked at him steadily. And the citation? Protocol violation. It was on my record. I wasn't disciplined beyond the citation because the CO, a man named Hatcher, wrote a separate memo acknowledging that my decision had prevented civilian casualties. Cole paused. The memo's in my service record. You still have access to your service record? My discharge papers and commendation documents. I have copies. I need everything. She wrote his name at the top of a clean page. The disciplinary citation and the memo, both. Tonight, if you can scan them. I can do it tonight. The prosecution is going to use your training as a weapon, Souza said. They're going to list your qualifications and frame them as inherently dangerous. That's their move. Our move is to show the jury, or the DA, before it gets to a jury, that your training specifically includes restraint protocols and rules of engagement and that you applied them. That's not a liability. That's evidence of discipline. Cole said nothing. The citation from 2016, she said. If they find it, they will. They'll try to frame it as insubordination, as a pattern of acting outside authority. She looked at him. But the memo reframes it entirely. A man who broke protocol in a war zone to protect civilians is not the same man as a man who picked a fight in a diner. She paused. The frame matters. I know. Do you trust me to build this frame? Cole looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching, with the particular steadiness of someone who'd been asked that question before and had learned not to answer it with reassurance but with presence. Yeah, he said. She nodded, turned back to her legal pad. One more thing, the witnesses. The truckers who gave Carver nothing. I want to talk to them. I don't know who they are. Dee does, Souza said. The waitress. She would have seen their payment, cash or card. If card, there's a name. She looked up. Can you get me to Dee? She's working lunch and dinner 6 days a week, Cole said. She'll be there now. Souza closed the legal pad, pushed the laptop into her bag. Let's go, she said. Dee looked at Souza the way people look at something they're deciding whether to trust. Souza looked back at her without performing anything. No warmth, no persuasion, just the direct attention of someone waiting for a decision to be made. And whatever Dee read in that, she read it in about 15 seconds, and then said, The 2 with the red hat were regulars. I don't know their names, but they drive a Peterbilt with coastal freight livery. They're here every Tuesday and Thursday. And the 3rd, Souza said, paid cash. Dee shrugged. Young guy. I don't think I've seen him before, but he left a phone number. Souza went very still. He left a number. On the back of a receipt, Dee pulled open a drawer under the register and produced a curl of register paper, the kind that comes with a credit card transaction. On the back, in blue pen, a phone number and the words call me, and below that a first name, Eric. Souza looked at it. Did you call? I didn't know what to do with it, Dee said. I almost threw it away. She paused. Didn't, though. Souza took a photograph of the receipt on her phone without touching it. She looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. Dee, Souza said, what did you see that night? Dee leaned on the counter. She had the look of someone choosing their words, not because they were afraid of them, but because she wanted them to be right. I saw 6 men come in looking for a fight, she said. I saw one man try to stop it from happening. I saw that same man get shoved first. She paused. I saw him put himself between those men and a child, more than once. Would you say that in a deposition? I'll say it in front of whoever asks me, Dee said. I'm 61 years old. I'm not scared of a deposition. Souza nodded. Thank you. They left the diner. On the sidewalk, Souza looked at her phone, the photograph of the receipt, and then at the street. Eric, she said. He saw something, Cole said. He saw enough to leave a number. She texted the photograph to herself, filed it somewhere. I'll find him. They walked back to Harbor Coffee. Souza collected her bag. She stood on the sidewalk outside with the Pacific wind coming up the street, moving her hair, and she looked at Cole with the practiced assessment of someone who spent a lot of time looking at clients and trying to determine what they were and weren't telling her. Is there anything else? She said. Cole thought about it. The piece of paper in his jacket pocket, everything he'd written down. He took it out and unfolded it and handed it to her. She read it. It was maybe 60 words. She read it twice. You wrote this the night Carver came to your house? Yes. This is useful, she said. It wasn't enthusiasm. It was the flat, certain tone of a professional recognizing a resource. The pattern you've documented, the health inspector, the insurance, the assessor's office, the school complaint, this establishes that what happened to you fits the same pattern of harassment that happened to the other business owners, which puts you inside Paulson's investigation instead of separate from it. I'm not a business owner, Cole said. No, but you became a target of the same operation on the same night you interfered with it. She folded the paper and put it in her bag. That's not coincidental, and it's not hard to argue. She looked at him. Cole, the DA's filing has a hearing date, 10 days. I know. In 10 days, I need the footage formally entered. I need depositions from Dee and ideally Eric, whoever he is, and I need your service record. Can you get me those things? The service record's tonight, he said. The rest depends on Dee and Eric. The footage is already in motion, she said. Paulson's people formally submitted it to the county this morning as relevant to an ongoing investigation. Pritchard's office has it. They can't pretend they don't have it. She paused. That changes the shape of this significantly. How significantly? She thought about it. Souza was not the kind of person who offered estimates carelessly. If Pritchard is a cautious man, she said, and the weight is redistributing, and Paulson's investigation is the larger thing he has to worry about, then the 5 counts against you become a liability for him, not an asset. Cole understood. Dropping the charges is cleaner than losing them. Much cleaner, she said, especially if Rourke development is about to become very publicly toxic. She looked at him for a moment. The endangerment claim about Sophie, that one concerns me more. It concerns me more too. Because it doesn't require a criminal proceeding. It triggers a separate process that's slower and harder to short-circuit. She looked at him steadily. Has anyone from social services contacted you? No. Okay, if they do, I call you immediately. And you don't answer questions. I know. She nodded, picked up her bag strap. I'm going to stay in town tonight. There's a motel on Route 9. The Harbor Inn, Cole said. It's not bad. I don't need it to be good, she said. I need it to have Wi-Fi and a quiet room. She started to turn, stopped. Cole. He looked at her. The 2016 citation. The thing in Kandahar. She paused. You said you delayed the extraction to get the civilians clear. Yes. 11 minutes. 11 minutes and change. She looked at him. Did everyone get out? A pause. Not long. The civilians, he said. Yes. She held his gaze for a moment, reading something. Whatever she found there, she put it where she needed it and moved on. Tonight, she said. The service records. Tonight, he said. She walked to her car. Cole stood on the sidewalk and watched her go, and then stood there a moment longer with the Pacific wind in his face. He scanned the documents that night at the kitchen table. His discharge papers, his commendation packet, the citation from 2016, and in a separate manila envelope he hadn't opened in 2 years, the memo from Lieutenant Commander Hatcher that had been included in his service record at Hatcher's personal insistence, which had at the time felt like the smallest possible consolation and now felt like a piece of infrastructure. Sophie sat on the other side of the table doing homework. She looked up once when he got the scanner out of the closet. What are those? She said. Papers from when I was in the Navy. She looked at the documents. Her eyes moved across them. The official headers, the seals, the technical language of military documentation that she wouldn't fully understand but could recognize as significant. She looked back at her homework. Are they important? She said. They might be, he said. She nodded, went back to her homework. Cole scanned. He sent the full packet to Souza at 9:14 p.m. She acknowledged receipt 6 minutes later with a single line. The Hatcher memo is exactly what I needed. Thank you. He sat at the kitchen table for a while after Sophie went to bed, not doing anything, not waiting for a call, just sitting, the way he sometimes did when the day had used him up and he needed to let the residue settle before he could sleep. He thought about Hatcher. He hadn't thought about Hatcher in a long time. The man had been wrong about a lot of things, tactically rigid, politically careful, the kind of officer who kept a mental ledger of every favor and debt, But he'd been right about the memo, and being right about one thing mattered, sometimes, more than being right about the bigger ones. He thought about the civilians in that house in Kandahar. A woman, maybe 35, and her mother, and two children who were small enough that he hadn't been able to guess their ages accurately. He'd gotten them to the adjacent building with 12 minutes to spare before the breach, and none of them had understood what was happening or who he was, or why this man in American military equipment was pulling them urgently out of their own home in the middle of the night. And they'd gone because there was no real alternative to going, and they'd looked at him the way you look at forces of nature. Not with gratitude, not with anger, just with the flat, accepting attention of people who know they are not in control of what is happening. He'd thought about them sometimes in the years since, not obsessively, just as the occasional inventory a person takes of the things they'd gotten right in a long series of things they weren't always sure about. He went to bed at 11. He didn't sleep well. He didn't expect to. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle and thought about 10 days and thought about Sousa in the Harbor Inn with her laptop and her legal pad, and thought about Paulson in Salem with Walter's documents and the dash cam footage, and thought about Tanner in a state police interview room being scared enough to talk. At 2:17 a.m., his phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from a number he didn't recognize. No area code he could place. 4 words. Drop it or Sophie. He read it twice. He sat up, put his feet on the floor, read it a third time. Then he got up, went to Sophie's room, looked in. She was asleep. He stood in her doorway for a moment with his phone in his hand and the cold floor under his feet and the specific calibrated stillness in him that existed in the space between feeling something and deciding what to do with it. He went downstairs, took a photo of the text on his phone screen, emailed the photo to Sousa, copied Carver's personal number in the message, then forwarded the original text to both of them. Sousa responded in 4 minutes. It was 2:21 a.m. and she was awake. Don't respond. Don't touch the number. I'm calling Paulson. Cole sat at the kitchen table and looked at the dark window over the sink. The rain had stopped sometime around midnight. The street outside was wet and still. He thought about what the text meant. That whoever sent it had his number. That they'd sent it at 2 in the morning, which was either a pressure tactic or a sign of desperation. And pressure tactics are a sign of desperation too if you knew how to read them. Someone was scared. Not of Cole Barrett specifically, of what was building around them. The investigation, the footage, Tanner talking, Paulson in Salem with a box of documents, and whatever she was constructing from them. Of the shape of something that had started as harassment campaign against old mechanics and small business owners, and had expanded on a Thursday night in a roadside diner into something much harder to control. Sousa called him at 2:34 a.m. Paulson has the number, she said. She says it's almost certainly a burner, but there are metadata they can pull. A pause. She also said... Sousa stopped. What? She said good. She said she's been waiting for them to make a mistake like this. Cole absorbed that. It means they're worried, Sousa said. I know what it means. Can you get Sophie somewhere else for a few days? He thought about his sister in Coos Bay. Linda. She had a house and 2 kids, and she'd asked no questions the last time Cole had landed on her doorstep in a state he couldn't fully explain. Yes, he said. Tomorrow morning, Sousa said. Tomorrow morning, he said. He went back to bed, lay in the dark. His shoulder had stiffened overnight, and he adjusted his position twice before he found something tolerable and lay still. He was not afraid. He noted this. He assessed it the way you assess any condition. Was it accurate? Was it useful? Was it something to trust or something to examine? He decided it was accurate and moved on. What he felt, in the dark, in the quiet house, wasn't fear. It was the specific cold clarity that arrived when the situation became simple. Not easy. Simple. The complexity had burned off. What was left was this. Someone had used the name of his daughter in a threat. And that meant that whoever had sent that text had reached the end of their strategic options and moved into something else, something that lived past the edge of what Garrett Rourke's attorneys and Jeffrey Marsh and the county DA's office and the Rotary Club could manage or explain. And something past that edge was exactly where Paulson needed them to be. Cole closed his eyes. He slept at 3:09 a.m. Not well, but enough. He drove Sophie to Coos Bay in the early morning dark. She'd asked why when he woke her at 5:30, and he'd said there were some things happening with work, and he needed her somewhere settled for a few days. And she'd looked at him with that particular 10-year-old assessment that had gotten sharper in the last 2 weeks and said, "Is this about the diner?" And he'd said yes, and she'd gotten up and packed without further complaint, which was either trust or exhaustion, and he was grateful for both. Linda met them at the door in a bathrobe with coffee already made. She was 3 years older than Cole, same jaw, same way of being still when something required stillness, and she'd learned a long time ago not to ask Cole questions he wasn't ready to answer. She took one look at Sophie and put an arm around her and said, "You're sharing a room with Maya. She's still asleep. You can go back to sleep too." And Sophie went, and Cole stood in Linda's kitchen and drank the coffee his sister handed him. "How bad?" Linda said. "Getting better," he said, "but it needed a few days to finish getting there." She looked at him. "You okay?" "Yeah." "Cole." "I'm okay, Linda." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. She knew the difference between him lying about being okay and him meaning it, the specific way he meant it now. Not fine, not undamaged, but okay the way a structural wall is okay after something has hit it. Still standing, still functional, marked but not compromised. "She can stay as long as she needs," Linda said. "Few days, maybe less." "Okay." She refilled his cup. "Eat something before you drive back." He ate something. Toast, which was what Linda had that was fast. He kissed Sophie on the forehead in the dark of the room she was sharing with his niece, and Sophie made the small sound of someone not fully asleep. And he said quietly that he'd call tonight, and she said okay in the voice of someone already going back under. He drove back to Redwood Bay in full daylight. The Pacific was silver gray and flat in the distance off the highway, and he drove with the radio off and thought about the burner number and what Paulson would or wouldn't find on it and what the finding of it meant for the timeline of everything else. His phone rang at 8:41. "Sousa." "Paulson pulled the tower data on the burner," she said. "It pinged off a cell tower on the south end of Redwood Bay. She's not going to tell me more than that, but she said the metadata is useful." "Useful how?" "Useful in the sense that it corresponds to a location she already has in her investigation." A pause. "She didn't say which one." Cole thought about that. Garrett Rourke's offices were on the south end of town, on the waterfront, in a building with a view of the harbor that Walter's shop was partially blocking. "Okay," he said. "There's more," Sousa said. "Tanner talked." Cole said nothing. Full statement. Given last night to state police investigators. He corroborated the pattern of harassment against the waterfront businesses. He named Mason Rourke as the operational lead, and, she paused, he named Garrett Rourke as having direct knowledge of the pressure campaign. Not just his son. Not just his son. Another pause. "Cole, Garrett Rourke is going to be arrested today. Paulson's office confirmed it to me this morning, not officially, but clearly enough." Cole drove in silence for a moment. The highway curved toward the coast, and the Pacific came into full view, wide and flat and indifferent, and he looked at it the way you look at something that was there before you and will be there after. "And the charges against me," he said. "Pritchard called me at 8 this morning," Sousa said. "He wants a meeting this afternoon." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where he tells me he's dropping the filing." She said it flatly, without celebration. "He didn't say that. But that's the kind of meeting it is." Cole pulled off at a turnout above the coast and stopped the truck. He sat with the engine running and the ocean in the windshield. "The endangerment claim about Sophie," he said. "Also going away?" Sousa said. "For the same reason the rest of it is going away. You can't sustain an endangerment narrative about a man who is protecting other people's children, metaphorically speaking, from the company your client runs. It inverts." A pause. "Pritchard is a cautious man. He sees which way this is falling." "When's the meeting?" 2 p.m. at the county building. I want you there." "I'll be there." He sat for another moment after she hung up. The ocean did what it did. He watched it. He thought about Tanner in a state police interview room being scared enough to talk. He thought about a man reaching the end of his options and discovering that loyalty to a paycheck has a ceiling, and the ceiling is exactly as high as the jail sentence waiting on the other side of it. He thought about Garrett Rourke this morning, in whatever his morning looked like. knowing or not knowing that the arrest was coming. The offices on the waterfront, the harbor view, 30 years of building something on a coastline, using the weight of money to move people out of the way, and a Thursday night in a roadside diner where a single person hadn't moved. Cole put the truck in gear and drove. The county building in Redwood Bay was a two-story concrete structure from the 1970s that had been retrofitted with new windows and a handicap ramp and not much else. It smelled like carpet and recycled air and the particular staleness of bureaucratic institutions that process a lot of paper and very little movement. Dan Pritchard's office was on the second floor. He was in his early 50s, heavy-set in the way of men who'd been athletic young and had traded the activity for the schedule, with reading glasses on a lanyard around his neck and a desk covered in folders that were organized in a system Cole could see made sense to someone. He stood when Cole and Souza came in and shook both their hands without the particular warmth that might imply he was glad to see them. "Sit down," he said. They sat. He sat. He put his reading glasses on and looked at the folder in front of him and then took them off and put them on the desk. "I'm going to be straightforward," he said. "The investigation being conducted by the State Attorney General's office has produced information that materially changes the context of the Harbor Lantern incident." Souza said nothing. Cole said nothing. This was Souza's instruction. Let him say what he came to say without giving him anything to negotiate against. "The video evidence," Pritchard continued, "in combination with witness statements and the testimony given by Raymond Tanner, establishes clearly that Mr. Barrett acted in response to an unprovoked physical assault and that his use of force was consistent with the level of threat presented to him and to the other individuals he was protecting." He looked up. "I'm withdrawing the filing." "All 5 counts," Souza said. "All 5 counts." "And the language regarding Sophie Barrett?" Pritchard paused. "Not long." "Yes." "I want that in writing today," Souza said. "You'll have it by 5. Souza nodded once. Pritchard looked at Cole. It was the look of a man doing something he found uncomfortable. Not wrong, but uncomfortable, because the geography of comfortable had shifted under him and he was navigating the new terrain without having chosen it. "Mr. Barrett, I want to say that the handling of this at the local level—" He stopped. "You don't have to," Cole said. Pritchard looked at him. "You're doing the right thing now," Cole said. "That's what matters." It wasn't absolution. Cole didn't have absolution to offer and wasn't trying to offer it. It was just the plainest available fact. And he offered it because Pritchard was going to need to be functional going forward, and people who are drowning in guilt aren't functional. And Cole didn't want the man drowning. He wanted him doing his job correctly for whatever came next. Pritchard nodded. He looked back at the folder. "The Rourke matter is entirely in state hands now," he said. "My office has been asked to cooperate with the AG's investigation, and we're doing that." "Good," Souza said. She stood. Cole stood. She offered her hand and Pritchard shook it. She looked at him. "By 5, she said. "By 5, he said. "But—" The written dismissal arrived at 4:47 p.m. Souza forwarded it to Cole and then called him and said, "It's done," and he said, "Thank you." And she said, "Don't thank me yet. There's still the civil side to consider. Rourke's attorneys could pursue a civil claim even without the criminal one." And Cole said, "Okay." And she said, "But they won't." And he said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because their client is being arrested this afternoon, and they're going to have considerably larger problems to manage." He was sitting in his truck outside the county building when she called. After he hung up, he sat for a while without starting the engine. The afternoon had gone gray in the way of November afternoons on the coast, all the light draining evenly out of the sky, everything the same flat tone. He called Linda. "It's over," he said. "She can come home tomorrow." "You sure?" "Yeah." A pause. "She wants to talk to you." Sophie came on in the particular way of a kid who's been waiting for something and has been very deliberate about not showing that she's been waiting. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Is everything okay?" "Everything's okay." A beat. "Really?" "Really?" She was quiet for a moment. He could hear his niece in the background, Maya, who was 12 and had an opinion about everything, saying something he couldn't catch, and Sophie's muffled response. Then she came back on. "Dad." "Yeah." Maya says you're probably some kind of secret agent or something. Cole looked at the gray sky through the windshield. What did you tell her? I told her you do framing work. That's accurate. She didn't believe me. She can think what she wants. Another beat. Dad, were you scared during any of it? He thought about the question the way he thought about her real questions, with the seriousness they deserved. He thought about the 2:17 a.m. text and the 4 words in it and what those 4 words had done to the air in his chest in the dark of his bedroom. Yeah, he said. Some of it. She seemed to find this more reassuring than any other answer he could have given. Okay, she said. I'll be ready tomorrow morning. I'll be there at 9. Okay. A pause. Love you? Love you too, he said. He sat for a while after. Then he started the truck. Garrett Rourke was arrested at 3:15 that same afternoon at his offices on the waterfront by 2 state investigators who arrived without announcement and left with him in the back of a state vehicle while 3 employees watched from the lobby window. Cole didn't see any of this. He heard about it from Carver, who texted him 6 words at 6:22 p.m. Garrett Rourke. 3:15. Done. Mason Rourke surrendered to state police at 8:40 the following morning through his attorneys, which was the way people surrendered when they had enough money to manage even the optics of being arrested. He was charged with assault, conspiracy, and 3 counts related to the witness intimidation campaign that Tanner's testimony had opened up. His attorneys entered a not guilty plea and asked for bail and got it, which was also the way it worked when you had money, but the charges were real and the evidence was substantial and the plea wouldn't hold. Cole read about it in a brief notice on the regional news website. 1 paragraph. He read it once and moved on. The civil investigation of Rourke development took longer. It ran through the winter and into spring, methodical and accumulating, the way Paulson apparently did everything. 3 other business owners came forward once the Rourke name became publicly associated with the investigation. Owners who'd sold at prices they'd been told were fair and had known, quietly, that they weren't, but who had weighed the fight against the resources required to fight it and had made the practical decision. Their testimony added weight to what was already a substantial case. Walter Briggs didn't sell. His garage on Dunbar and 5th stayed open through all of it, and Walter was there 6 days a week the way he'd been for 31 years. And the Rourke Development Waterfront Project, which had been premised on acquiring that entire block, stalled, and then was reviewed and then was restructured into something smaller and less profitable that didn't require Walter's corner lot at all. Cole didn't talk to Walter about it directly, not in the way of people who debrief. They weren't that kind of acquaintance. What they were was the kind that develops between people who've been through something together that neither of them fully has language for, and that sometimes produces a friendship and sometimes just produces a nod when you pass each other on the street, and that's enough. The idea came to Cole in February. He was sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, grading nothing, doing nothing, drinking coffee, and reading a community board flyer that someone had stuffed in his mailbox. The flyer was about a break-in on the east side, a hardware store, 3rd one in 4 months, all of them small businesses with no cameras and limited security and owners who hadn't known what to do when it happened. The flyer asked if anyone had suggestions. He stared at it for a long time. He thought about Walter and about the other business owners who'd been pressured out of their properties, and about the fact that none of them had known what to do either, not because they were weak or careless, but because nobody had ever given them the tools to recognize what was happening to them until it was already too late to stop it. He thought about the diner, about the 11 people in it on a Thursday night who had looked away. He turned the flyer over and started writing. It took him 3 weeks to build it into something coherent. He talked to the owner of a community center on 5th Street who had a room available 2 evenings a week. He talked to Carver, who agreed to come in as a law enforcement resource. He called a woman he'd trained with in the teams who'd left the service and was now working in threat assessment consulting in Portland, and she said she'd contribute materials remotely. He put together a 6-week curriculum from memory, from training manuals he still had, from things he'd learned in dark places that turned out to translate surprisingly well to the ordinary geography of small towns and vulnerable people and situations that escalate slowly enough that most people don't notice until they're inside them. He called it the Harbor Safety Initiative because the name didn't need to be dramatic. It just needed to be accurate. He printed 40 flyers and distributed them himself, walking the waterfront and the east side and the residential streets, putting them in mailboxes and on bulletin boards outside grocery stores and laundromats and the post office. He spent $11 on the printing. Walter called him the day after the flyers went up. "I saw your flyer," Walter said. "Yeah. Safety workshops. Awareness, de-escalation, emergency response, basic stuff, aimed at people who run businesses or work late or live alone." Cole paused. "And older residents." A beat. "You mean people like me?" "People like you," Cole said. "People who should have had access to this information 8 months ago." Walter was quiet for a moment. "Who's teaching it?" "Me." Another pause. Longer. "Are you any good at teaching?" "I don't know yet," Cole said. "First class is Friday." "What time?" 7 p.m. Community Center on 5th. Walter said. Cole waited. "I might know some people who'd come," Walter said. "That would be useful." The first class had 19 people. Cole had expected maybe 8. They ranged from a woman in her 30s who worked the overnight shift at a convenience store on Route 9 to a retired couple who'd been following the Rourke story in the news and had questions about what recourse looked like when institutions didn't help you. There was a man who ran a food truck. There were 2 college kids who worked at the bait shop by the harbor. There was Dee, and Walter in the front row, in his white work shirt with the breast pocket, with his hands around a thermos of coffee and an expression that was the most alert Cole had seen on him. Cole stood in front of them and felt the specific discomfort of being looked at by a room full of people who expected something from him, which was not a discomfort he'd expected because he'd stood in front of things considerably more dangerous than 19 people in a community center and hadn't felt it then. But that had been different. That had been training and protocol and the armor of a role. This was just him, in jeans, with a whiteboard. He picked up the marker. "Okay," he said. "First thing. Most of you are here because something happened to you or near you or to someone you know. And most of you, when it happened, felt like you should have seen it coming but didn't." He paused. "That's not a failure of instinct. That's a failure of information. We're going to fix the information part. The instinct you already have." He wrote one word on the whiteboard: recognition. "That's where we start," he said. "Everything else follows from that." Nobody left early. The second class had 27 people. By the fourth class, the community center had set up extra chairs. A woman who ran a nonprofit for elderly residents in the county had heard about it and called Cole and asked if he'd consider expanding into other towns up the coast. He said he'd think about it. He was still thinking about it. He didn't publicize the workshops beyond the flyers and word of mouth. He didn't want media. He didn't want the story to be about him specifically, about the diner, about what a former special operations veteran had done in a roadside confrontation. He wanted it to be about the 19, then 27, then 34. People in plastic chairs in a community center who were learning to read a room before the room decided to read them. Sophie came to the fourth class. He hadn't asked her to. She'd asked him on a Tuesday morning if she could come to his Friday class, and he'd said it might be boring, and she'd said she'd be the judge of that. She sat in the back row with her notebook. She brought a notebook, which he noticed, and she took notes, actual notes, in the specific handwriting she was developing that was already more legible than his. After the class, she walked out with him, and they drove home in the early dark, and she didn't say anything for a while, which was the way she processed things. He waited. "The part about exits," she said finally. "Yeah. You always do that. When we go somewhere, you look for exits." "Yeah." "I thought it was just a you thing," she said, "like a weird habit." "It started as training," he said, "became a habit." She thought about this. "Should I do it?" "It's useful," he said. "You don't need to be obvious about it. Just notice. It becomes automatic." She nodded, looking out the passenger window. The dark passing, the wet road catching the headlights and releasing them. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." Walter was paying really close attention. "I know." He was taking notes too, on his phone, hunting and pecking. A pause. He typed really slow. Cole almost smiled. "He's a fast learner, though." Sophie looked at him. In the dark of the truck cab with the dashboard light on her face, she looked older than 10 in the specific way children look older when they've been through something that aged them slightly and they've absorbed it rather than broken under it. He didn't like that she'd had to absorb it. He was grateful for how she'd done it. "Is this what you did before?" she said. "In the Navy, teaching people things?" "No," he said. "In the Navy, I was mostly in places where the teaching had already happened and we were applying it." "What kind of places?" He thought about what to say. He'd always planned to tell her eventually. Not everything. The everything was too much and too complicated, and some of it was classified and some of it was just his. But the shape of it, what he'd done and why and what it had cost him. He'd planned to tell her when she was older, and then older had kept moving forward the way it does. "Dark places," he said. "A long way from here." She considered this. "Did you help people there?" The highway curved. The ocean appeared and disappeared between the trees. He thought about the house in Kandahar, the woman and her mother and the two small children and the 11 minutes and the dark and the sound of the breach. 3 buildings over, muffled by walls and distance, arriving to him as he was standing in a road with his weapon down and a small child looking up at him with enormous dark eyes that understood nothing about what was happening, except that this man was, for reasons she would never know, making sure they were clear of it. "Sometimes," he said. "Yeah." Sophie nodded. She looked back out the window. After a minute, she said, "I'm glad you do it here too." He drove. The town appeared ahead of them, the lights of Redwood Bay coming out of the dark, the harbor somewhere beyond them, the water and the boats and Walter's corner shop with its lights off now, because it was past 9 and Walter went home at a reasonable hour, like a man who had earned the right to go home at a reasonable hour. Cole pulled into their street and parked, and they got out and went inside, and Sophie hung up her coat and took her notebook upstairs, and Cole stood in the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea that he didn't entirely know why he was making until he remembered that Linda had brought a box of it when she'd come up the previous month and he'd been meaning to try it. He left 1 cup on the counter, took his to the kitchen table, sat. The house was quiet. The town was quiet outside the window. The harbor was out there in the dark, and Walter's shop was on its corner, and Mason Rourke was somewhere managing lawyers, and Garrett Rourke was in a different kind of room managing a different kind of problem, and Paulson was probably still in Salem building the shape of something that would outlast all of them. And in a community center on 5th Street, 34 folding chairs were still arranged in rows around a whiteboard with 1 word written on it in black marker. Cole drank his tea. He thought about the night in the harbor lantern, about the moment he'd stood up from the corner booth. He'd been asked about that moment a few times since, by Sousa, by Carver, in his roundabout way, once by a journalist who'd gotten his number from somewhere and whom he hadn't spoken to beyond saying no thank you and hanging up. What made you stand up? What were you thinking? Were you afraid? The honest answer was that he hadn't been thinking much at all. He'd been watching an old man's hands tremble, and he'd been aware of Sophie's breathing 3 feet away from him, and he'd made the calculation that he'd been trained to make in the first 2 seconds of any situation. Assess, identify the primary risk, determine whether intervention reduces or increases it, and if it reduces it, move. The assessment had taken about a second. He'd moved. What he'd found in the space between the assessment and the movement, in that single second, or less than a second, while everything in the diner was still possible to prevent, was not courage in the way people meant it when they used that word in the context of stories like his. It was simpler than that. It was the specific recognition that he was the only person in that room who had the ability and the training to change what was about to happen, and that looking away from that fact was a thing he'd stopped knowing how to do. He'd never been sure if that was strength or its own kind of compulsion. He'd stopped trying to decide. Sophie came back downstairs at some point, hair down, in the sweatshirt she slept in, and saw the extra cup of tea on the counter and looked at him with a raised eyebrow. He shrugged. She picked it up and sat across from him, and they sat together in the kitchen and drank their tea without talking, which was the best kind of evening he knew how to have. Outside, Redwood Bay did what small towns do at night, settled into itself, quietly, without performance. The harbor lights moved on the water. Someone drove past on the street. A dog barked once and then didn't. And in the morning, Cole Barrett would go to work. He would frame walls with his hands because that was what the week required. And he'd pick Sophie up from school, and on Friday he'd stand in front of whatever number of people came to the community center on 5th Street And he'd write one word on the whiteboard and he'd start from there, because that's where everything started. And the word was still recognition, and the rest still followed from that. The strength that matters most is never the kind that destroys. It's the kind that stops long enough to notice who needs protecting, and then refuses to look away.